In the 80s of the already past century, there was a taxi driver who lived in Chicago. His name was Josef Pawlowski. He was not very young. Having been sick, he left a will. He asked his fellow soldiers to bury him overseas at the cemetery of a little German town in Torgau, on the river Elbe. There was complete huddle on the roads of Europe in the spring of 1945. Battle maps, accurate and logical, could not give even a rough idea of what was going on then. The Germans flee from the war, scared by Goebbels' propaganda, which stated as if the entire population of the country would be deported to Siberia. The liberated concentration camp prisoners are trying to get back to their families. Those who were driven to work for Germany want to get home.
Thus, when we were passing through Germany, it was just unbelievable, somehow even inexplicable. When we captured a settlement, people would stand with their hands up. Civilians with hands stuck up. That is, they had been told that we would destroy everybody there, and so on. But did we really do this? No. We were fighting the army. Once we were approaching a settlement, we were riding horses. It was quite warm and the sun was shining. At the outskirts of the settlement, there were small kids, girls, and a woman. A covey of, say, about 15 to 20 people. Now I don't remember the number exactly. Glad, joyful, smiling. They were holding wildflowers in their hands to greet us. And when we approached them, they all cried out in chorus, "Ivan, you son of a bitch! Ivan, you son of a bitch!" The soldiers howled with laughter. But why did they meet us that way? Well, there was an advance party, a platoon moving ahead of me, ahead of our squadron. So the inhabitants of the settlement asked the platoon soldiers, "There are Soviet troops arriving soon. Would you let us know the best way to greet them?" So the soldiers told them exactly what the best way was.
The chaos was getting worse. The disbanded army is looking for some entity to yield prisoners to. The prisoners move around almost without any escort. Sometimes there was just one convoy for 1,000 disarmed soldiers and officers. Almost everybody was aware of what was going on. Almost. But not everyone. It is the middle of March. Hitler recommends to Guderian to go on vacation. The general responds, "My Führer, I will choose a cottage for rest in a place which would not be captured within the next 48 hours. At that same moment, the local wreckers attack on the confectionery plant somewhere in a neighboring town. The Allies find themselves waist-deep in sugar and chocolate bars. The tired people rob shops briskly, but at the same time they clean up the streets after fighting in an orderly and careful manner.
The battle is over. Morning is coming. And they immediately start picking up the broken stone and rubbish. A few hours later, the work is over and the pavements are clean. A demolished house is located right over there, but there is neither rubbish nor broken stone around it. Everything has been cleaned up. Well, here I am walking through town, and it's so clean that it couldn't possibly be cleaner. There is a woman. She has a bucket, a mop, soapy water, and she is washing the pavement with soap. Afterwards, she would rinse it all down with the clean water, and there you are.
The huddle of freedom and the proximity of victory turned the territory of Europe into a huge nomadic camp, where no one knows for sure what would happen after the next turn. Some things start getting into a mess at the front, too. Who is at whose side? Who supports whom and why? The chaos gives rise to mistakes and absurd situations that are often unpleasant. For instance, 3 Englishmen met the Red Army men, all by chance, and they were sent to fight together with our infantry. As they wrote in a statement to their command later on, complaining post factum, that restless evening the Russians interrogated them, and the officer refused to recognize them as Englishmen, insisting they would inform him about the German division they belonged to. After that, the Brits were sent to a pig pen to spend a night in the company of German prisoners. It's curious that afterwards, the English command who asked for apologies received the following laconic response from the Soviet registry. Your letter is received, but as it is written in a rude and impolite manner, the command will not be informed about it. The Red Army was moving across Europe with such a swiftness which scared the Allies. The soldiers exhausted themselves. They would have reached the Mediterranean Sea and even the Pyrenees.
Of course, if they did not open the second front, we would have reached the English Channel. What would we have done over there? The same we did in our own territory.
From the moment the Allied forces landed in Normandy, the linking of 2 armies became inevitable. But the discussion of the Allied forces and the Russians about the capture of Berlin was really frightening. It showed well that the common sense too often gives way to the desire for revenge.
When they had a meeting,
It was all settled by word of mouth. It was decided back in Yalta how Germany would be divided and where the encounter was to take place. Hitler's reconnaissance obtained part of the information, but the place was kept secret. Each of the armies got precise instructions where they had to stop advancing. But the number of minor actions increased and could escalate into a conflict.
Did the soldiers have anything to do with the political ambitions of the upcoming new partition of Europe? The Russians had been afoot for the 4th year. They had survived anger and were reaching the elation of the winners. No one was going to flirt with the Brits or the Americans.
However, Eisenhower, Stalin, and the Brits, they all realized that the troops were to know for sure where they would meet the Allies. This was to happen somewhere not in the field, and what is most important, the meeting was not to turn into a battlefield. Everybody was in fact afraid of the approaching event. It was really not so easy to organize all that in practice. On top of it, the armies had different equipment. The Americans used radios, and Soviet troops worked on wire telephony. But whatever system one used, without speaking each other's language, they could not establish contact, which aggravated the mess. They needed some natural borderline. A river was the best choice.
The Elbe, flowing from the south to the north of the country, the last major natural obstacle on the way to the Allied forces between the Rhine and the Oder, was the most correct river. Considering mutual distrust and different outlooks on the destiny of the world, the politicians were seriously afraid of the outcomes of the meeting. A part of Hitler's top commanders had separate negotiations with the Allies on the variants of the capitulation. Goebbels had already come up with the Iron Curtain term and put it into practice. The idea was to put a fence around civilized Europe to stop the Soviet hordes coming from the east. It casually emerged that as the occupation zones had been divided already, the Americans would soon have to retreat and surrender a part of the territories to the Soviet Union. Hundreds of thousands of people rushed behind the Elbe, being afraid to be liberated by the Soviet troops. By the end of March, Churchill arrived to the Rhine in his airplane. They said that the explosions of the shells falling some meters away frightened the Prime Minister as much as the upcoming linking up with the Russians. Neither he nor Stalin had any illusions regarding the mutual trust, let alone friendship. Letters of instructions were filled with statements of harmful complacency and unnecessary credulity.
I served as a buzzer for a platoon communications division, and I had radio operators with me, so we learned everything through the radio. Being communications workers, later on we got accustomed to even the intonations of the command. Well, once we realized from the talks that something incomprehensible was to be prepared, they did not report it to us, but something was going on. So Gurdjieff sends for me and says, "You know what? It's over. We will go not to Berlin, but to Prague. And the troops are starting to move in an absolutely different direction because of that. So from there, we moved on to Prague. And then from Prague, we moved to the Elbe. Across the Elbe, in fact. Around, say, the 20th of April, the command informed the staff of the division that there could be an encounter with the American troops advancing from Normandy at the river Elbe. The prearranged signal for this encounter was a series of red rockets from our side and a series of green rockets from the American side. I seem to remember it was a foggy morning. I am about to... You have to take into account that so many years have passed. At least it was not a sunny day, only a bit foggy. And so they made their way over there. The company commander Goloborodko went to reconnaissance. Well, Goloborodko went over there to that side. So the senior lieutenant Goloborodko, commander of the 6th Company of the 175th Rifle Regiment, generally speaking, it was the first occasion in case to consider the one to be the firstborn. In other words, 2 divisions were linked up. They were not linked up in battle, of course. It was a surveillance patrol, and they met in patrol. They crossed the river. In fact, they met some Germans, They just... Well, some division was leaving, actually. Nevertheless, no combat operations took place at that moment. That is for sure. Well, then Goloborodko came back. He reported to the regiment's commanding officer on what and where. Well, we transmitted it all, informing accordingly that the reconnaissance party returned. Goloborodko proved that actually no Germans were found there, that there was just a group of unknown military men dressed in a uniform other than the Soviet one, that those men simply wore different uniforms. And the second meeting took place in Torgau. It was already after 3 or 4 p.m. How was it? The same day, only several hours later, our reconnaissance man, Sergeant Robertson, set out to Torgau. He did not find any German troops there, but at the end of the bank of the river, he discerned soldiers in unfamiliar uniforms. He thought maybe these are Germans who had changed their uniforms to mislead the Americans, still more so that they opened fire at him.
So
he went to a chemist shop, found some commonplace green antiseptic there, and painted a white control flag with it, which he stuck out of one of the windows. The Russians noticed him and, without understanding, well, who was engaging in negotiations with them, sent their signals for the Americans, a red rocket. However, they did not get a proper response, so that everybody was at a loss. It seemed like no one was shooting, and Robertson went to the bank of the Elbe with his self-made identification sign, a flag smeared in green antiseptic. There he heard someone shouting, "Comrade!" And then he went on to the destroyed bridge. And the Russian officer, Silvashko, was coming across towards him. Nobody ordered anything of the kind. They simply climbed on that bridge and met. They could not say anything to each other, except they just kept shaking hands. Robertson had a small jeep. He made a suggestion, and the Russian arrived with him to the American unit lines. It was an unauthorized meeting. No one sent him, Robertson, and no one sent Silvashko. But it did happen so. Here is Silvashko and Robertson. This is the photo of the two of them, published in numerous Soviet and American newspapers.
But he was the first to prove.
Our commander of the division, General Reinhardt, said to Robertson, "Chap, you got there without an order," and put him under detention, though only for an hour. Soon everybody realized that these guys were the heroes of the day. And how smart he was, that Robertson. One might say that he stole that Russian to prove that the meeting had actually happened.
And in the meantime, our secret agents were at full speed investigating the absence of Silvashko from the unit. No kidding, the commander of the platoon went to visit some people in strange uniforms, not informing when he would be back.
At first, no contacts were allowed, neither from the American side for the Americans being punished for that, nor for the Soviet side. When Stalin, there was an order issued permitting contacts to commanders of divisions. There was an order issued permitting contacts to the commanders of divisions, corps, and the army commander.
Генерал, разрешите обратиться? Да. Союзники, американцы.
Да, интересно. Хоть последний день войны, второй фронт посмотреть.
Вот.
Победа!
Товарищ, вот так могли бы жить люди всего мира.
Как так? Выпивать, что ли?
Нет, так дружно, доверчиво.
Да, могли бы. Посмотрите на эту идиллию, господа. Это самые тяжелые последствия войны.
A movie is a movie, in fact, and nothing else. Nothing else, really. The other thing is that, in many cases, everything is much too simplified, and people start thinking this way. My granddaughter believes that the Allies met and hugged each other, and the war was over, and there you are. You know, Americans behaved somehow in a more cheeky way than we usually did. As for us, it was all where to go, how to go, and all of that kind. And they were the freedom. They crossed the river in boats, several men already, and they started communicating with us. Friendships and all that, hugs and the other, you see. That was the difference between us and the Russians. Perhaps we had a different attitude to many things. They had a stricter discipline. I don't know how it was with such things as meals. For example, if they tried to serve us yesterday's supper for breakfast, we refused to eat it. We just threw it away and demanded what there had to be according to the regulations. Is it possible with the Russians? I remember once my commander told such a strange story. We didn't know whether we should believe it or not. As if one of the Russians tried to take a bicycle from a civilian German. At the same time, an officer would try to stop that soldier, and then he started shooting at him. What was that? An exaggeration? Propaganda? Misunderstanding of the situation? I don't know. I remember some American even presented me with a cigarette case. I kept it somewhere, and then, I don't know. Maybe my grandson took it away. Yes, that was it. Things like this, really. And what could we suggest as a present? Maybe a red star from the cap? The other thing was that afterwards, the sergeant major would ask where the star had gone.
А ты звездочку мою бережешь? Oh. Yes. Okay.
This happens next day. On the 26th, when General Rusakov invited the divisional commander Reinhardt of the 69th Infantry Regiment.
That was the beginning of a series of famous parties at the Elbe. The surprise and joy of those several soldiers and officers on the bank of the river who smacked each other's backs were so sincere that the curiosity went over to the superior ranks. They started to pay visits and invite guests in compliance with the titles.
Now, if you were lucky,
We drank vodka with the Russians, and when we met the French, we drank Calvados. In Europe, we learned how to drink wine. In France, it was green wine. We did not even understand at first that it was wine. We tasted it only afterwards. What about us, we common American lads? Hadn't drank anything except beer. We didn't have the slightest idea about wine, cognac, or vodka, or champagne. In one small town, one person of the civilian population, I think they were refugees, showed us the wine cellars in one castle. There were several thousand boxes of this champagne, 12 bottles at each. We loaded about 5,000 bottles into our truck. It was long enough for a month.
General Bradley writes in his memoirs, Russian vodka and endless toasts to the victory had knocked down officers of several staff headquarters. But dinners and libation became more and more frequent, and Bradley, slightly puzzled with what was going on, instructed that everyone who went to the Russians had to eat 50 grams of butter on an empty stomach, so that they do not fall face first into the Russian borscht. Soviet political bodies, in their turn, informed the personnel well beforehand. On the 25th of April and prior to the first toast of the following, the prestige of the dignity of the Russian soldier and officer must be held according to the position occupied. And on the 28th, the order was issued to the units and detachments, as well as to the soldiers and officers personally, to demonstrate high discipline and competently develop consciousness. Getting ready for the banquet hosted by Marshal Konev, General Bradley ate, farsightedly, some sandwiches with butter and emptied a can of condensed milk at breakfast. And before the departure of the general to the Russian lines, experienced officers who had already visited some joint feasts provided him with a bottle of mineral oil. Swallow this on your way, and you would be able to drink anything they pour for you.
Влетел Сережка к другу, ах, Антон, ты окажи услугу, я влюблен, сохну как телега.
According to Bradley's recollections, there was plenty of fresh caviar, veal, beef, cucumbers, brown bread, and again some butter on the table of Marshal Konev. Toasts to the Big Three, to the victory were pronounced, but Bradley was surprisingly lucky. Konev drank white wine, not vodka. Thus, Bradley himself did not have to drink hard alcohol. Konev, in his turn, was surprised that the American general brought copies of operation maps with him, where the troops' disposition was indicated. Konev was shocked. Such information in the Soviet army was considered top secret, and he would never think it possible to share these maps with the Americans. In the evening, when the guests were already leaving the villa, Konev and Bradley went out to the garden. An orderly led out a Don horse with a red star embroidered on the saddle. Konev gave the bridle to Bradley. An inscribed pistol was added to the gift. Anticipating possible exchange of gifts, Bradley brought in his plane a brand new Jeep, which had just arrived from Antwerp. A memorial inscription was made on the bonnet of the truck in English and Russian, and a new short rifle was enclosed with the Jeep. The toolbox was carefully packed with American cigarettes. Still, on his way to this banquet, Bradley was worried that he would face reprimands from the head of the Army Control and Finance Directorate. And still, 20 years after the war, he would have to pay for that. Well, to hell with it, said Bradley. We could not come empty-handed. This was as if the final rehearsal of the victory celebration, and even more, ideal victory. Here at the Elbe, no one neither divided anything nor promised or deceived anybody. The Americans were impressed that there were many women in the Red Army, with medals and always wearing arms, possibly participating in combat operations. Americans discussed. Our officers from their side felt shy sometimes in the presence of chic American canaries.
Once during the performance, suddenly an American actress and singer who was singing the song came up to the spectators. Her commander, General Simpson, and our commander, they were sitting together next to each other. Simpson was without a cap. He was bald. Ours was, as I remember now, in a forage cap. I do not remember well now. But still, she took a kerchief. I don't know what words she was singing, but perhaps according to the lyrics, she put her kerchief onto his head and tied it, you see, as if on a doll. It was strange for us, because for us, anything of the kind would have been impossible. No one would dare to approach the army commander so freely in such a situation.
On April 27th, there was a salute in Moscow to celebrate the meeting of the Allies. But there, at the Elbe, everyone was trying to surprise each other. The Americans demonstrated tap dance and jazz. As they say, there was a jazzman found urgently among our musicians who could keep up a melody of the overseas colleagues. The Red Army Choir performed the American anthem. A ballet company performed folk dances. "This is marvelous," exclaimed Bradley then. "Just girls," said Konev with a shrug of his shoulders. "The Red Army soldiers." Two weeks later, Bradley himself did not leave the favor unanswered. When Konev paid him a reciprocal visit, a violinist in an ordinary soldier's uniform was part of the cultural program. His playing entranced our marshal. Magnificent. Konev was stunned. "Oh, this." Bradley waved his hand carelessly. "Nothing much, just one of our American soldiers." Boaster. He kept silent that this soldier was a famous musician whom they brought for a day from Paris to show off in front of those Russians. And Europe itself kept surprising both Americans and Russians. The winners were curious in examining the corner of the earth, which they had finally reached.
In the company of my orderly, I often traveled around without any special goal, just to see how people live. And one day near a hamlet, either I ran out of petrol or my motorcycle broke down somewhere, so we stopped. And I came up to that German saying, "Please let us spend the night at your place." He gave us a small room. In the morning, I took out a banknote intending to pay the host for the night. It was a banknote equal to 100 occupational checks. The man waved his hand, saying, "Nicht gut, nicht gut." I thought he was being dishonest, for he was given 100 checks and it seemed too little for him. He took out a small piece of paper and started writing on it with a pencil, listing the amount of electric energy he had spent on us, how much this and how much that, pointing to our bed and to the window. And there, our motorcycle had been standing in the open air. I looked out of the window. The motorcycle stood there all clean, washed, and charged with petrol. Finally, our host wrote down everything, how much the cleaning was, and the tidying up, and the work itself. All in all, he came up with the amount of only 2 Czechs and some Pfennigs. I looked at his calculations thinking of the kind of man he was. I was suggesting him 100 Czechs, and still he calculated all these bits. He took my 100 Czechs, went away somewhere, and brought back the change. This is honesty.
Europe, still confused but already breathing the fresh air of freedom, could embarrass, if not seduce, our heroes, who unfortunately had a one-dimensional freedom vision. And from the very beginning of the historic meetings at the Elbe, they were continuously in the focus of attention of competent authorities of the Soviet and Allied forces as well. Both were afraid of mutual influence, almost uncontrolled in the context of such warm-hearted communication. The confidants of the Generalissimo heard him saying in April 1945, "Lots of Decembrists will come back from there." The instructions of the Russian command were quite strict. Inform the subordinate and demand from them not to show any backslapping or other forms of toadyism with the Allied troops' representatives. No initiative in organizing friendly meetings. And no refusing them as well. It is emphasized in the reports of the political bodies that our people are correct at meetings, moderate in drinking, and try to avoid any discussions relating to military secrets. In the same statements, the details are given as to who said something incorrectly and about what. For example, one of our officers suggested the Americans fighting together with the Russians against Japan, and someone was reduced to a lower rank because of that. In the same statement, the command is informed about the attempts of the Americans to embarrass our officers with provocative questions about the future order of things in Berlin, about the attitude towards refugees and prisoners of war. And in the course of the banquet, one of the Soviet commanders tried to ask an American general if his soldiers were entrenching against us. Entrenching? Certainly not. We are allies after all.
Well, about how they behaved, I'll tell you a story. We dropped into a bar to have some beer. You could not find anything to eat at that time in Berlin, but there was plenty of beer. We occupied 2 tables there. There were some Russian soldiers nearby, too. And in one of the corners, there were Americans, a group of Americans. As always, they were sitting there with their feet up on the table, drinking beer and smoking cigarettes. Well, they had quite a good bit of beer. And so one of the Americans took out a cigarette and hurled it at those soldiers. Not at us, but those soldiers. They stood up and beat them properly. And I told my soldiers, let's go, for the commandants are going to be here shortly. Let's go before they take us as witnesses. We paid for the beer and left.
And I don't think it would have been right.
Eisenhower wanted a closer contact between the Allies. He suggested creating special groups of communications workers, translators who would facilitate communication both in person and for the exchange of information between the command of the Russian and the British-American troops to coordinate combat operations. But Stalin rejected this idea. He wanted to lead his own war. not to consult anybody or coordinate things. The contacts were never direct, but through Moscow. There was a strange feeling that the Russians were, after all, not very good as allies. Not enemies, but not quite on our side. As for our prisoners of war, the Americans used to feed them before letting them go. They provided them with the cuts of fabric for suits, greatcoats, coats, persuaded to stay. Did some recruiting work among our prisoners of war. And they told this to me, those who did this. And those who had been recruited. Some stayed, leaving for Canada, America, and Australia. And those who did not agree went to the polar region. This is how it all turned out.
Actually, they went away from each other quite quickly. A week, maybe a bit more. The command still continued exchanging visits. But those who had hugged each other on the banks of the Elbe were already on the march.
This is a bit hard to express because it happened there just as it had been in the lines. It was just like that. We met for no reason, hugging each other and all that, but it was so, as if we were not at war anymore, but just playing the fool, actually. Just met and hugged each other. You see, the American and that Russian just went to meet each other without any orders. This was a personal decision. I think they made the end of the war closer by this act. They just did what they felt was right to do.
This place has remained the symbol of the possibilities for another world order, where there are no more enemies and everyone is free. Maybe participants recalled later that the meeting at the river was somehow unreal. One could not quite believe that it was actually happening. Josef Pawlowski, whom his fellow soldiers considered a dreamer and a castle builder, had kept his feelings for his whole life.
Joseph Pawlowski is a taxi driver. His latest occupation took place in Chicago in the beginning of the 80s. In his last will, he asked to be buried in Torgau, at the town cemetery. And his fellow soldiers obeyed his will. It means that an ordinary American who was at war and met us there made a will to be buried in the town where we had met. I think this is what he really meant.
Shock.
Politicians were already determining the areas of influence and established frontiers, and traffic control barriers, checkpoints, document check. Agreements were already emerging at these frontiers. They had to tackle a lot of problems, including the people who were left in Europe without a place to live, sometimes without a native country, and those thousands of people whose destinies were still in the hands of the Allies, who were steadily turning into bureaucratic occupation authorities. There were still several days before the end of the war and the capitulation. The combat was still on. But this short let-up at the banks of a small river signified the end of the war. And the beginning of victory.
This piece of brick with melted metal was found by Soviet soldiers in Berlin in the office of Adolf Hitler in the Empire Chancellery, the Reichskanzlei, in May 1945. This stone was Brest Fortress. But nobody knows today why Hitler kept it in front of him and what he was thinking about.
However, without any doubts, Hitler remembered Brest during all 4 years of the war. It didn't get lost among the hundreds of battles. It was the first step of the Reich defeat.
Within 2 hours, fell into rank and listened to the Führer's orders. We were told why we were there. We were there not to depart to Persia, but to punish England upon authorization of Russia, and not to dull vigilance of the British, and then to quickly transport troops to the English Channel and to debark in England. No, we, soldiers of the Great Reich, will be in war with the Soviet Union itself. But there's no force that can impede movement of our armies. It will be a real war for the Russians, and it will be just victory for us. We pray for it. Well, I woke up early in the morning and was lying in bed without sleep. I remember there was a roaring like airplanes flying, then explosion, then second, then third, then it became a real wave.
И потом все это превратилось в такой настоящий рев.
A hurricane broke out above our heads, so much strength we had never seen before. And later during the war, our division took part in the first artillery attack. First went all division artillery, with 9 light and 3 heavy batteries. Then 2 additional squadrons of mortars and the 4th Special Operations Regiment. Vehicle-mounted launchers for heavy rocket mines made 2,880 shots during a short period.
first bombs and first shots of the German Chronicle. Together with the Wehrmacht troops, a huge army of cameramen from the Ministry of Propaganda went to the east. Soldiers with cameras take seats in the cockpits of bomber aircrafts. They are in the front rows of the attacking units. They film for a new movie, Victory in the East. First episode of the conceived cycle, Victory in the West, has already been released. Denmark, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Paris, a swastika above the Eiffel Tower, and a parade of German troops on the Champs-Élysées. The German people like such shots. Brest was crowded with people on the evening of June 21st. Those who were lucky enough to get tickets were hurrying for the concert of Moscow artists. There was music and singing on the dance floors in the fortress. People watched movies, Valery Chkalov and The Circus, in summer cinemas. No need to hurry back home and get enough sleep on a Sunday. On June 22nd, all artillery of the 12th Army Corps of the Wehrmacht opened fire on the sleeping fortress. Everything was planned to the last minute. Every 4 minutes, the zone of fire is moved 100 meters forward. After this precisely planned hell on earth, everything shall be torn to bits.
It was important on the grounds of psychological nature to open short but massive fire from all attacking means.
I
was on duty on the 22nd. On duty, here is the window, and I was sitting behind the window from that side. Yes, from that side. And when everything started, pieces of glass started flying, and it caught me. I got everything immediately, fell down to the floor and waited. They will never get me so easy. I moved here, closer to the wall, and was lying still. Everybody, not just me, got down from the beds and waited. We were hiding until everything ended. Where to run? Everything is in fire, and they cover every inch with the fire. Yards, buildings as well. It was a real hell. Nowhere to run, everything is in fire, and this artillery fire lasted for 45 minutes.
Pyotr Bondarev, direction layer of the 98th Anti-Tank Battalion, had done his service in the fortress since March 1941. He was sent from Brest to Vysokolitowsk to replace senior conscripts. The service went on perfectly. During the spring exercise, he hit a moving target on the second try and was granted a vacation. Soldiers who were talented in addition to having a secondary education were a real rarity and were chosen by commanders for political lectures. In mid-June, he achieved the rank of junior political instructor. June 22nd was when he should have received the tabs with 4 triangles before the general parade. The Germans didn't wait for such serious strength from the fortress. The main forces of the Brest garrison were in summer camps. Only 7 battalions stayed in the fortress: logistics units, repairmen, and commanders' families. Construction of this powerful fortress in the western part of Russia started in 1833, on the island near the junction of Mukyovets and Yuzhny Bug rivers. The center of fortification was the citadel, a polygonal barrack.
Width of its external walls, which had gun ports and embrasures, was about 2 meters. Internal walls were about 1.5 meters thick. Its 500 casements could locate a garrison, about 12,000 soldiers and officers with necessary stock of provisions and armaments.
The fortress is protected by Treyaspolskaya, Bobrinskaya, and Volinskaya fortifications from the west, north, and south. A 10-meter earth rampant with casements inside goes around the external perimeter. 4 islands enclosed by rivers and ditches are connected by 9 bridges. 9 more external forts were built by the end of the 19th century, and in the beginning of the 20th century, the frontal fortifications were reinforced again. But with the appearance of bombing aircraft and long-range artillery, this powerful citadel became a big barrack. In the case of danger, troops had to just leave it. But it was almost impossible to exit through the narrow gate under enemy fire. General Heinz Guderian. He already captured this fortress in 1939 and knew its disadvantages. Then Brest stayed under Wehrmacht rule for almost a week until it was transferred to the USSR. The Germans studied the structure of the fortress in the smallest details, and they now tailored all upcoming action using a mock-up. Fascist infiltrators had been operating in Brest a couple of days prior to the invasion. The first 4 minutes of the shell attack seemed to last an eternity. At 3:19, German attack fighters of the first tier launch boats and head to the other bank of the Bug, to the east.
When we ran out of our flat, rounds were bursting, aircrafts were flying, and we were running as the other people. For some reason, everybody was running to Sredny Bug. I don't know why everybody was running there. Mum was barefoot, and her feet were wounded. There was such a roaring rave, and we all ran under this staircase and in the basement.
In 1945, the infantry division that was assaulting Brest had special status with the Führer. The division of former Austrian army was formed in the native land of Hitler, near Linz. Personal devotion to the Führer is cultivated in this division. Soldiers of the division were first to enter Paris. They fought in Belgium and Holland. They took fortified Warsaw. Everybody expects fast victory from them, and they have no doubts about it, as they have no doubts in the genius of their commanders. 3:15, 3:19, 3:23, 3:27. The avalanche doesn't stop. Deformed land is immediately captured by the advanced forces. At 3:40, diving bomber aircrafts make a joint attack. They pass quickly Yuzhny Island, hosting only storehouses and hospitals. They finish the sick people directly on their beds with their rifle butts. Others are killed selectively. But on Zapadny Island, attackers are met by the fire of the border guards from the 9th Border Station. The border guard stops the enemy, but not for long. Centers of the resistance have been localized. The German forces break into the citadel through Tiraspol Gate. They take some encasements of the radial barrack, officers' dining room, club, and former church.
The Russians were taken up from their beds by our fire. It was clear, as first captives were in their underwear, but they surprisingly quickly formed combat groups behind our advanced companies and started to organize desperate and persistent defense. Our casualties, especially among officers, reached tragic size in short time.
By the middle of June 22nd, we had to send footage of the Brest fortress capture back to Berlin. Reporters wait for effective plans, white flags of capitulation, raised hands, and captured colors. These shots will appear in the propagandistic movie Capitulation of Brest-Litovsk as quickly as possible. During a victorious procession through Europe, German divisions had propaganda companies in their structure. Specially selected soldiers were making up these companies, who could write, take shots, convince, and fight. The dust kicked up by the boots of marching soldiers and tanks was still in the air, and generals in the general headquarters were already watching fresh shots of a regular blitzkrieg. Weekly victorious editions of the newsreel Wochenschau were persuading Germans of the invincibility of the German army.
We took the church. Halt your fire on the square.
The Red Army Club was a very good point. We can place our fire on the entire yard of the citadel from here. 2 hours of war passed. Attackers behave like they are at home. They don't bend down while walking. Defenders are bloodless because of the shell attack, so no need to hurry. The Germans even have enough time to be curious. But the tourist placidity of the attackers does not last long. They will soon understand that the surviving Red Army men have regained their consciousness and are ready to fight. The southeastern part of the barracks is occupied by the 84th Rifle Regiment. Its commander, Yefim Fomin, without waiting for clarification of the situation, organizes soldiers and orders Komsomol organizer Matavoisian to perform the first counterattack and knock the enemy out of the citadel. Soldiers rushed to the attackers from the side of the Komsk gate. They were equipped differently. Somebody was even equipped with pioneer spades.
We jumped over dead bodies of my friends, and the Germans, wounded, were first to attack. Loud Russian hooray is still sounding in my head, and it turned to be stronger than artillery preparation.
The Germans attempt to retreat, but they end up in the crossfire from the barracks of the 33rd Regiment and the border guards of the 9th Border Station. After unsuccessful attempts to escape and having lost almost half of the squad, the fascists stay in the club. Artillery is no longer able to help the German soldiers since they are too close to the positions of the Russians, and Soviet snipers make it impossible for them to fight their way to the soldiers caught in the citadel.
I saw 3 soldiers 300 meters away on the roof of the casement. I wanted to open fire, but was afraid they were our friends. It shortly turned out they were Russians and very crafty shooters. They took ground on the edge of the casement where they could be reached with only very enormous efforts.
These snipers shoot the operators of machine guns from the platoon of Lieutenant Winch when the latter tries to change their position. A bullet pierces the lung of Lance Corporal Teuchler. The cannonade was still on when Ivan Akimoshkin, Chief of Staff, runs into the positions of the 98th Artillery Squadron. He brings to life unconscious soldiers and orders to release rounds and deliver projectiles.
Then, after being done, I run out as I was dressed, and Chief of Section runs after me. We run to cannons. Our battery commander, Kaganovich, was there. We came and everything was a mess. We took it and back here, and we brought it up to the rampart.
By 7:30 in the morning, the fortress that felt destroyed recoups again. Defense is organized by the entire perimeter. The Kobrinsk Gate is protected by the 98th Anti-Tank Artillery Squadron. The 125th Regiment conducts battle in the northeast of the citadel. Political officer Yefim Fomin commands in the southern and southwestern barracks. The western area is protected by the soldiers of the 44th Regiment. The eastern and western forts are kept by the soldiers of the 393rd Special Aircraft Battalion and small groups which failed to leave the fortress during the first hours of the battle.
There are around 400 soldiers in these casements, soldiers and commanders from different units and forces. Families of commanders also arrived here. Nobody knew anybody. There were no commanders here in the first minutes of the war. A couple of hours later, commander of 44th Rifle Division, Major Gerilov, fought his way to here and organized defense on this section. He broke down all personnel to squads and companies and pointed out their sectors of defense. Defense staff was created under command of Captain Kazankin. Hospital was organized under command of Raisa Abakumova.
Artillerists who have survived after the fire, among whom there is a direction layer, Bondarev, bring their light .45 calibers up to the fortress rampart. It gives a clear vision of the vehicle with Hitler's soldiers. They are behaving as though they are on a leisure trip.
They were already on Kobrinsk Highway. We turned back. They didn't even notice us. When we opened fire, I shot. They took mines immediately.
Defenders conduct battle for 10 hours. Fomin regularly sends intelligence groups to Brest and Kobrin, but they do not return. Nobody knows the real situation, and Brest was completely captured by the enemy at 12 o'clock. All means of retreat were cut off, but contrary to Hitler's forces' expectations, resistance was just increasing. Attempt to capture the fortress at once failed. The attack died out. At 13:15, the German command throws 133rd Infantry Regiment into battle, with no result. An assault gun battery is moved forward. They are supported by the fire of 9 200mm mortars. Everything is to no effect. The fortress furnishes resistance. At 14:30, commander of the 45th Division arrives to the section of Kobrinsk fortification occupied by the Germans to personally assess the situation. He becomes confident that the infantry is not able to take the citadel on its own. Schlipper orders to move back the infantry after it gets dark and to resume major caliber fire. It was the first attack of the renowned 45th Division since the beginning of the war in Europe.
21 officers and 290 non-commissioned officers and privates were killed by the evening. Commander of the 3rd Battalion, Captain Praxa, and commander of the 1st Squadron of the 99th Artillery Regiment, Captain Kraus, together with their staff officers, were on the casualty list as well.
Meanwhile, there is busy but joyful activity in the Führer's general headquarters in Berlin. Within several hours of the first day of the war, the German troops advanced into the Soviet territories for tens of kilometers. But the Führer was slightly nervous. Command of the 4th Army doesn't report for some reason about the capture of Brest, and the 45th Division should have moved forward several hours ago. When the Führer finally gets the report that the fortress assault will resume tomorrow, he can't believe what he hears, but he doesn't lose his temper in order not to cast gloom on the successful day. Brest was important for Hitler both as a military site and as a symbol. It was here in 1918 that the Soviet army got down on their knees and accepted the splendor of Germany by unquestioningly accepting all the conditions of their victors. But then came shame for Germany in the Versailles Treaty, and Russia terminated the Brest Treaty. It should be punished, and punished here in Brest. Moreover, Brest Fortress couldn't be bypassed.
Brest-Litovsk fortress had key position, and primarily its citadel, which already played an important role in 1915 and 1939. It was impossible to bypass the fortress and leave it uncaptured, as it blocked important Bug River crossings and approachways to both tank highways that had decisive importance for transportation of forces and for supplies.
According to the plans of the German command, troops aimed at Moscow shall be moving through Brest in a non-stop mode. Hitler's generals believed that the fortress was a serious obstacle, but they didn't consider it as a powerful defensive barrier.
On the first day of the war, Private Vasilikovsky brought me a holder with a military topographic map that he'd taken from a killed fascist officer. The map revealed all intentions of the enemy's command to us. Under the order, they should have captured the fortress at 12 on June 22nd.
Из этих ворот бойцы под командованием.
This is the gate where soldiers, led by the regimental political officer Fomin, started their counterattacks from.
Люди погибали. А позже, 23 июня...
These counterattacks died out. People died. And later, on June 23rd, the Germans shepherded people they captured there in the hospital, are wounded, women and children, in front of themselves.
Женщин и детей. И они кричали за...
And they shouted to the fortress defenders, shoot, shoot at us, do it, but don't let the enemy go.
Враг не прошел. Все это происходило...
All this happened here, in this place, on this bridge.
На этом мосту.
Когда нас вели в плен,
When we were brought to prison, the Germans put several big guns on this bridge and opened fire on the fortress, and they convoyed us on this bridge and ordered us to lie down exactly near these guns. We and children lied down. You understand, when 4 or 5 cannons shoot at once, something happens in your head. You know, the brain is shaking. Slava got his eardrum blown, and he is completely deaf now. And I saw that Nina's hair turned gray. She was a small girl, and her hair was turning gray because of fear.
Assault guns continue methodically firing on the fortress. All power of the artillery corps was thrown on these century-old walls. Shortly after that, they bought 2 super heavy cannons, 600mm mobile mortars, Karl. Each of them had its personal name. This one has the inscription Thor on its carriage. Projectiles weighing 2 tons each, making craters 10 meters deep. In Europe, just the appearance of Karl near the walls of the town under siege meant victory. In Brest, the first victim of Karl was 19-year-old German Private Werner. He died because of a heart attack at the first shot of this super mortar. His family received a letter saying that he died for the sake of the great Germany. Inactivity came at 10 in the morning.
Всякое сопротивление бессмысленно. Давайте! Всякое сопротивление бессмысленно. Давайте!
We had to make a message about giving up during breaks in fire to undermine the morale of the Russians.
They were partially successful. According to the report of the commander of the 45th Division, approximately 1,900 people gave up on the second day of the war. There were many women and children among them, but there were also military reservists.
Well, some of them were dressed as civilians, others wore military uniform. And they had downy pillows with them. So they carried these pillows on their chest, like bulletproof jackets. They tried to exit the fortress.
In the middle of June 23rd, Hitler requests an update regarding the situation in Brest. He cannot wait to move the general headquarters to the east, closer to the front line. During the war in Europe, general headquarters moved to the captured territory practically immediately after Reich troops crossed the border. Now, after receiving news from Brest, the Führer decided to wait. The third day of defense started with artillery fire, comparable to the beginning of the war in its strength.
The Hitlerites recognized insistence and courage of the defenders of Brest fortress. But they couldn't understand why the fortress was still fighting and didn't give up. In the very beginning, nobody was going to defend the fortress. The Red Army men tried to escape from the stone trap, and few of them managed to do it with great losses. Those who failed to fight through were waiting for help from friends and didn't know that the German tanks were near Minsk already. At 1900, I noticed my binoculars that a boy, small boy, 6 or 7, was walking on the road leading to the eastern fort. Projectiles and explosions all around him, and he walks further, then he disappears.
After artillery fire, the assault platoon of the 133rd Infantry Regiment breaks into the citadel. This platoon releases the soldiers of the first tier of intrusion closed in the club. Battle is already conducted in encasements. At the same time, the biggest Koblensk fortification comes under attack. The enemy captures a majority of the main rampart, and this is where Captain Shablovsky's team is taken captive.
They brought Dad and military by the evening, so they were bringing them along these ramparts, yes, and they put them there. That's where they were standing, the military, and we were standing downhill, and we started shouting, "Mom, Dad, Dad." Well, I also shouted something to him. He couldn't hear me because, you know what was happening here. There was such yelling and shouting. Children were shouting. The only thing I could do was to watch. I saw that he was hardly standing. His soldiers were supporting him with hands.
Raisa Shablovsky was 8 years old then. She doesn't remember many events of those crazy days, but the most horrible moments in her life are with her forever.
Dad then pushed away his convoy because the latter was walking nearby and shouted, "Those who don't want shame of captivity, follow me." He jumped and got onto these guardrails and flew down. He was followed by other jumpers, but they were shot all at once. After that, we were brought back. Mom later told me, "He's our dad, maybe. His tunic was turgent and, he was without belt. They took it from him."
Many commanders' wives fought together with their husbands in encasements. Attackers of the 45th Division report to their commanders about the women's battalion, but it was an exaggeration. There were no women's units in the fortress. June 24th, after the citadel was captured on the third day of the war, the command of the 45th Division makes their first report about capturing Brest-Litovsk fortress. And only after that, echelons with Hitler's general headquarters depart eastward to Rastopi town, but nobody knows about it in the fortress. The fortress keeps fighting. In the evening of the same day, in the building of the engineering barrack houses, the surviving commanders conduct short briefings. Its result was Order Number 1, the only document of the besieged garrison. And they didn't even have enough time to write it to the end because of the starting assault. But it is exactly this document that will save the names of commanders and numbers of fighting units.
We put our guns and opened fire on them. They thought it would be an easy walk, but we killed 20, 30, I guess they're people. We went there on all fours in the night. We took their food, drinks, and bags and brought everything back. We ate their German food. It was enough for 2 more days, and then we ran out of everything.
After the fall of the citadel, the eastern fortification became the main center of resistance. Attackers made many attempts to capture Koblenz Rampart, but artillerists from the 98th Anti-Tank Squadron was strong in defense. They hit a couple of tanks and several armored fighting vehicles. When the enemy destroys cannons, soldiers with rifles and grenades go into casements. Wolkenschau reporters filmed the captives with pleasure. No risk, but spectacular activity. But it's not enough for a full-size movie. The Ministry of Propaganda in Berlin demands only victorious footage from the Brest, but troops cannot provide them, so they do stagings as usual. Here is one of them.
A machine gun resumes fire protection of the advancing flamethrowers and demolition squads before the main defense line of the enemy.
Soldiers attack a permanent fire position. They keep it under machine gun fire. A flamethrower operator moves very closely and covers everything in fire, but nobody shoots back from the fire position, as there is nobody inside. But leadership and audience will like it. In a short time, Brest footage will appear in cinemas, but nobody will reveal that fights for the fortress are still on. Attacks and artillery coverage are combined with psychological treatment. The Germans call for giving up by means of leaflets. The Germans promise life and humane treatment.
And there, at that point, they put as they were able, I don't know, such device and shouted, "Russ, give up, end. We're in Smolensk already. We took Minsk, and you still fight here." Well, and we know it's bullshit. We know that our Red Army will come in any case. We had no doubts.
They shouted, "Rus, give up," but they didn't understand that Russians were not the only ones in the fortress. Belarusians, Ossetians, Ukrainians, Uzbeks, Tatars, Kalmyks, Georgians, Chechens. The fortress garrison was a small mirror of its motherland. Soldiers in 30 nationalities fought here, but they were all united as the entire country. It is impossible to get at the eastern fort. A perfect defense is arranged here. The defense was led by a major. The eastern fort is a horseshoe-shaped redouit of the Kobrinsky fortifications. Major Pyotr Gavrilov is the commander of the 44th Regiment. Combat officer, participant of the Finnish War, he was nearly the only senior officer who was able to fight his way to the fortress to his unit. June 27th. By a twist of fate, this day was the date on which the Division Party Commission appointed hearing of the personal case of Communist Major Gavrilov. Some of his co-servicemen wrote an application on him, calling him an alarmist who persuaded his soldiers that war with the Germans was close. It must be said that Gavrilov didn't hide it, but the Party Commission session wouldn't look too promising for him, and it was the war that saved Gavrilov from reprimands. On June 27, Schlipper reports about capture of the fortress again, and again it's a lie. The fortress fights on.
Крепости, которая сама находится на двух реках.
There was no water in the fortress located on two rivers and near bypass canals, and its defenders were suffering thirst.
Дело в том, что фашисты,
The point was that the fascists took the water pipes out of operation by artillery fire at the first assault of the fortress. Some defenders of the fortress state that the water disappeared a couple of hours before the beginning of the war. Every day we waited that there would be some rain, but there was no rain. And the air mixed with ash and dust made our throats sore. We wanted to drink. We opened the well, 2 meters deep, and the water came into the well from the German stalls. That is, gas mask didn't work. It was impossible to drink anything.
One must not drink water mixed with horse urine and manure, even if dying of thirst. That well, which became useless, was used for hiding the division colors and documents before the counterattack. They were going to take it after their return. Pyotr Bondarev also hid his Komsomol card in that well.
Akimochkin told us to get prepared and fight our way to this point. One soldier went and was killed. One soldier was sent, another soldier was sent, and he didn't return as well. Then 25 people or so gathered, took short rifles. We had nothing more, and a grenade, which were brought from the storehouse in the night. Yes, we managed to bring grenades, so we took the grenades and we were going to fight our way to the desired point. Let's go, let's find our way. But as we got to the water, and some of us began to drink, here everything started. They started to fire on the water, the air, everything around us.
Mr. Shuk died in battle, and Lieutenant Akimoshkin, after running out of ammunition, took the last group of his soldiers and went into hand-to-hand battle, and was taken captive after being heavily wounded. Brutal because of great losses, the fascists killed him on sight, and later in Brest they found and killed his children, 6-year-old Vova and 4-year-old Anya. Pyotr Bondarev received fragment wounds in that attack. The same mine killed political officer Siariev, who was running nearby.
Well, I was wounded by the mine that killed him. A grenade hit him in the stomach, and all his blood sprinkled at me, and fragments hit me at the legs. So he was hit in the stomach, and I was hit in the legs.
This is how he was taken captive. More accurately, he and people like him were not even taken captive, but rather gathered or collected. And the Germans were afraid to go into casements. The wounded kept firing. The captives were sent to take them out.
Wounded soldiers who remained in the fortress weren't able to exit, but they didn't give up. They kept fighting, and the flamethrowers were engaged. The Germans virtually burned out casements with defenders. Because of the hellish heat, and bricks and steel were melting, falling down from the walls like teardrops. Weapons, people, and walls turned into a single thing.
и стены превращались в единое целое.
On the morning of June 29th, the Hitlerites delivered an ultimatum to the defenders of the eastern fort to give up and to issue Commander Gavrilov. Otherwise, the garrison would be wiped off the face of the earth. At 8 in the morning, Junkers throw down several 500-kilogram bombs onto the fort, but it withstands and the firing continues. In the afternoon, bomber aircraft show up again. The Hitlerites prepared for their last argument for the defenders. Following 500-kilogram ground bombs, one of the aircrafts throws a super-potent bomb weighing 1,800 kilograms. It pierces through the casements. The explosion shakes not only the fort, but all of Brest. After this explosion, attackers break into the fort.
People started collecting dead bodies. They were collecting here, there, everywhere. Healthy people wear our Red Army uniform. They put me onto wooden boards and drug me away. After the Polish wagons are arriving, they brought me across the river and took me to the Balea Podliaska camp.
On the 1st of July, the Germans again report to their command about the fall of the fortress. Hitler rebukes his generals for inaccurate reports. Perhaps it was his first show of anger in this long war. Fate was assisting Pyotr Gavrilov, commander of the brave garrison of the eastern fort. The Germans were confident he died at the bombing or killed himself, but he was hiding in the casements together with a couple of soldiers for 3 more weeks and continued to destroy intruders. When they surround and try to capture him, he, being wounded and stunned, manages to throw a grenade. It was July 23rd, the 32nd day of the war. The Hitlerites didn't dare to kill this captive. The German reporters didn't film the capture of the last defenders of the fortress. They weren't matching the script of the victorious movie. The movie had no success. Cameramen who failed to see the white flag were sent by the commander to Minsk and Smolensk. Films shot in Brest were used for production of Chronicle editions, though the final accord of the movie could be footage of Hitler and Mussolini visiting the Brest fortress together in August of 1941. Hitler wanted to see these walls of the Russian citadel that hadn't given up, to understand why his renowned division was held here for so long. His generals couldn't explain the strength of morale of the fortress defenders. Hitler didn't believe in men of iron, he believed in iron machinery, and he was proudly shown defeated long-range guns and tanks. However, he was not told that defenders of the fortress didn't have these weapons, that these weapons were collected near Brest and brought here to make an impression and justify losses. Mussolini noticed a transcription carved into one of the walls and asked for a translation. "I am dying, but I will not give up. Farewell, my motherland." Duce was so shocked that he remained silent for a long time. And this is where Hitler picked up that brick with melted cartridges. But nobody showed Hitler the cemetery of the 45th Division. And nobody told about soldiers of the Wehrmacht continuing to die in the fortress, killed by shots of invisible defenders. He wasn't told the soldier's legend about Frau mit Automat, a ghostly woman from the casements equipped with the trophy assault rifle. Soldiers tell her every shot is accurate. Soldiers say her every shot is accurate. Then she disappears underground, and her shots sound in other locations just as suddenly. All attempts to catch or kill her had no success. She could be noticed only at a distance. The appearance of this woman was scary. She looked like the spirit of revenge and death. Every time when going to watch in the fortress, the Germans prayed and wished to one another not to meet this woman. The day before the Führer's visit, 2 soldiers didn't come back from the watch.
Hitler left and Frau mit Automat remained. Who knows whether Hitler was able to continue the war against Russia? If he was told about her and other defenders of Brest Fortress who remained here to fight to the end. or if he would be able to understand that the fortress is not just walls, but people, first of all.
Люди.